In 1913, Carl Jung vanished, not metaphorically, literally. He cut off nearly all contact, abandoned his academic career at its peak, and plunged into a period of isolation so intense, his colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. 6 years later, he emerged with discoveries that would revolutionize psychology forever. And now, Andrew Huberman's neuroscience is proving that this disappearance wasn't a breakdown, it was a protocol. If you're feeling an unexplainable urge to disappear from everyone's life, stick around, because what Jung discovered about this impulse completely changes how you'll interpret that feeling. There's a phenomenon most people get wrong, that growing desire to pull away, to stop answering texts, to cancel plans, to simply disappear. Conventional psychology calls it social avoidance, a symptom of depression, a problem to be treated. Jung called it something else. He called it the beginning of the individuation process, the journey to wholeness. And here's what will shock you. Dr. Emily Carter, on a Huberman Lab episode from February 2024, revealed that specific neurons in the dorsal raphe nucleus monitor your level of social interaction. They function like a thermostat. When you're above your ideal socialization point, these neurons fire aversion signals. They literally create discomfort to push you toward isolation. Your brain isn't malfunctioning when you want to vanish. It's trying to lead you somewhere. But before I explain where it wants to take you, I need you to understand something no one tells you about Jung's disappearance. In 1912, Jung was Freud's heir apparent. He was considered the crown prince of psychoanalysis. He had prestige, recognition, a brilliant career, and he threw it all away because he realized that as long as he was surrounded by expectations, social roles, and external demands, he'd never be able to hear his own inner voice. The break with Freud wasn't just professional, it was existential. And what followed was a period Jung would later call his confrontation with the unconscious. 6 years of near-complete isolation, where he descended into the depths of his own psyche. His colleagues thought he'd gone insane. Some claimed he was having a psychotic break. The medical community abandoned him, and it was exactly during this period that Jung developed everything. The archetypes, the collective unconscious, the theory of the shadow self, the individuation process. The ideas that would influence not just psychology, but literature, art, spirituality, and now, ironically, neuroscience. Hold on to that, because it'll make sense in a moment. Now I need to explain why you're feeling this urge to disappear, and why ignoring this impulse could be the biggest mistake of your life. Jung wrote a phrase that should be engraved in every therapist's office in the world. Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to yourself. You can be surrounded by hundreds of people and still be completely alone. Because true loneliness isn't physical, it's communicational, it's existential. And here's the paradox Huberman has neurologically confirmed. When you force yourself to socialize beyond your point of social homeostasis, you're not connecting, you're performing. You're spending energy pretending to be someone you're not. You're feeding your mask while your soul starves. Dr. Carter explained that social media has created an illusion of connection that actually amplifies isolation. You post to hundreds of people, but you're not talking to anyone. You get likes, but you don't receive presence. Digital connection is the neurological equivalent of eating plastic thinking it's food. Your brain detects the falseness and further increases the hunger for real connection. And when you don't find that real connection in the external world, your unconscious starts pushing you inward. But here's something that will contradict everything you've ever heard about isolation. Jung didn't see loneliness as a problem to be solved. He saw it as a tool to be utilized. He wrote, "It is always important to have something to bring to a relationship, and solitude is often the means by which you acquire it. You can't give what you don't have, and you can't discover what you have while you're constantly busy being what others expect you to be. Strategic disappearance isn't escape. It's preparation. Think about it. How many hours a day do you spend managing other people's expectations, responding to messages you don't want to answer, participating in conversations that don't nourish you, maintaining relationships out of obligation? feeding a social image that doesn't even reflect who you are. That's the weight of the public persona. The social mask that Jung identified as the first layer that needs to be crossed in the individuation process. And as long as you're investing all your energy in keeping that mask in place, you won't have energy left over for the real work. The work of confronting your shadow, of integrating the repressed aspects, of discovering who you really are beneath all the layers of conditioning. The impulse to disappear is your unconscious trying to give you permission to stop pretending. But be careful, because there's a trap in this process that Jung explicitly warned against. He wrote, "You can never come to yourself by building a meditation hut on top of Mount Whitney. You will only be visited by your own ghosts, and that is not individuation. You are completely alone with yourself, and the self does not exist that way. The disappearance cannot be permanent. It cannot be a definitive escape from the world. It has to be strategic, temporary, purposeful. Individuation is only possible with people, through people. You need to isolate yourself to find yourself, but you need to return to realize yourself. And this is where Huberman's neuroscience adds a layer Jung couldn't have known. The human brain wasn't built for prolonged isolation. There are neural circuits that depend on social interaction to function. Dr. Carter showed that chronic isolation alters the structure of the dorsal raphe nucleus, creating a kind of social drying out. You lose the ability to connect the longer you stay isolated, so there's a window, an optimal period of disappearance that allows for individuation without causing permanent neurological damage. Jung lived this intuitively. 6 years of intense but not complete isolation. He maintained contact with his family, continued seeing some patients, wrote occasional letters. He didn't disappear completely. He disappeared strategically. And when he emerged, he wasn't the same person. He'd been through a psychological death and rebirth. The old mask, the public persona, had been shattered. The genuine self had emerged now. I need to tell you what really happens during this disappearing act, what Carl Jung faced during those 6 years, and why most people abort the process before it's complete. When you step away from the external world, the internal world amplifies. It's like stepping into a sensory deprivation chamber. External stimuli diminish, and the internal ones become deafening. Carl Jung described this period as a direct confrontation with the unconscious. He had visions. He heard voices. He experienced altered states of consciousness that bordered on psychosis, but instead of running from these experiences, he documented them, dialogued with them, integrated them. The Red Book, published almost a century after his death, contains the records of this period. It's an extraordinary document of a mind talking to itself, of an ego learning to dialogue with forces that would normally remain unconscious. And here's what most people don't understand. This confrontation is inevitable for anyone who truly disappears. When you remove the external distractions, all that's left is you. And you'll quickly discover, are much more than you thought. The shadow self emerges. All the aspects of yourself that you've repressed, denied, projected onto others, they start to manifest. And if you aren't prepared to integrate them, they can destroy you. That's why so many people abort the disappearance prematurely. The confrontation is too intense, the silence is too loud. The solitude reveals truths they'd rather not see. They come running back to the surface, to the distractions, to the public persona, to the safety of the false, and they miss the opportunity of a lifetime to truly find themselves. Andrew Huberman explained in several episodes that the brain has a mechanism of resistance to uncomfortable states. The anterior mid-cingulate cortex, which he calls the center of the will to live, needs to be strengthened to endure periods of intense discomfort. Elite athletes have this region more developed. People who give up easily have it atrophied. Strategic isolation, this disappearing act, is a workout for the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. Each day that you endure the discomfort of silence, of internal confrontation, of productive solitude, you're strengthening your ability to persist. And here's something that Carl Jung discovered, that Andrew Huberman is validating now. There's a natural cycle to this process. Carl Jung identified that the individuation journey follows alchemical stages: nigredo, the darkening, the descent into darkness; albedo, the whitening, the reflection; citrinitas, the yellowing, the emergence of higher consciousness; rubedo, the reddening, the final integration. The disappearing act corresponds primarily to nigredo. It's the dark phase, the descent, the confrontation with everything that's been repressed, and it needs to be traversed completely so that the following phases can emerge. Interrupting nigredo prematurely means having to start from scratch later. The collective unconscious doesn't forget. The material you avoided is still there, waiting. And it will find you again at some future point, usually in much less controlled circumstances. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Are you ready to truly disappear? Not for a week-long vacation, not for a weekend retreat, but for enough time, so that the individuation process can really happen. Before you answer, I need to explain something that will change how you plan this disappearance. Carl Jung didn't disappear in a chaotic way. He created structures, kept an obsessive journal, developed the technique he would call active imagination, dialogued with figures from the unconscious as if they were real people, painted, sculpted, transformed the internal material into external forms. He wasn't running away from the world. He was building an internal world that could then inform his relationship with the external world. And here's the protocol that emerges when we combine Carl Jung with Andrew Huberman. First, you need to understand the difference between passive isolation and active isolation. Passive isolation is what most people do when they disappear. Lie in bed, watch shows, infinitely scroll social media, escape discomfort with minor distractions. This isn't individuation. It's avoidance. Active isolation is different. It's intentional. It's structured. You remove the external distractions not to escape, but to create space for the internal work. Carl Jung woke up early every day during his period of isolation, meditated and wrote, painted, sculpted, maintained a rigorous routine even while removed from the world, because he knew that without structure, the internal chaos would consume him. Andrew Huberman confirms this neurologically. Isolation without structure leads to dysregulation of the dopamine system. You lose motivation, focus, ability to experience pleasure. But structured isolation, with routines, with production, with purpose, keeps the neural circuits functioning in a healthy way. Dr. Anna Lemke, in episodes about dopamine on the Huberman Lab, explained that the brain needs regular challenges to maintain dopamine homeostasis. Without challenges, you enter a state of deficit that mimics depression. With appropriate challenges, you maintain mental health, even in isolation. So the first principle of strategic isolation is to create a more rigorous routine than you had in the external world. Not less rigorous, more rigorous. The second principle is to document everything. Carl Jung wrote compulsively during his period of isolation, not just his insights, but his dreams, his visions, his conversations with internal figures. He created records that allowed him to process the material that was emerging. Andrew Huberman talks frequently about journaling as a tool for neuroplasticity. The act of writing forces the prefrontal cortex to organize information that would otherwise remain chaotic. You're literally rewiring your brain when you write about your internal experiences. And there's a specific form of journaling that combines Carl Jung and Andrew Huberman. You write not only what happened, but what you felt. Not only what you felt, but which part of you was feeling it. You start to identify different internal voices, characters from your collective unconscious, autonomous complexes that operate without your conscious permission. When you can name these characters, they lose power over you. Carl Jung called this differentiation, separating the ego from the complexes, realizing that you aren't your internal voices. You're the one who observes the voices. The third principle is to maintain a minimal connection with the external world. Carl Jung maintained contact with his wife, Emma. He continued seeing a select few patients, He didn't vanish completely. He disappeared just enough to get the work done, but not so much that he lost his grounding in reality. Huberman confirms that complete isolation is neurologically dangerous. The social neurons in the dorsal raphe nucleus, they actually start to atrophy after extended periods without any interaction. You literally lose the ability to connect. So strategic disappearance doesn't mean zero contact. It means minimal, intentional contact with people who don't force you to wear the mask. People who allow you to be who you are, discovering yourself to be. For most people, that means reducing from hundreds of superficial contacts to a half-dozen deep connections. Absolute quality over quantity. The fourth principle is, have a return date. The disappearance cannot be indefinite. It needs to have a planned end, not because you're going to give up, but because the process has a natural cycle. Jung emerged after 6 years, with a clarity he didn't have before. He knew who he was. He knew what he had to offer the world. And he returned with a mission. For you, the cycle might be shorter. 3 months, 6 months, a year. It depends on the depth of the work that needs to be done. But it needs to have a horizon, a date when you come back, transformed. That date functions as a psychological anchor. It prevents the isolation from becoming permanent escape. It creates urgency for the inner work, and it gives the unconscious a deadline to complete the process. Now I need to tell you what happens when you complete the disappearance correctly. Jung described the feeling of emerging from the individuation process as a rebirth. The old mask had died. The authentic self had been born. He was no longer who people expected him to be. He was who he really was. And when you emerge this way, something interesting happens in your relationships. Some people don't recognize you anymore. Not literally, of course, but energetically. The person they knew no longer exists. And if the relationship was based on that old person, it does not survive. This scares a lot of people. The fear of losing relationships prevents many from completing the process, but Jung was clear about this. Relationships that don't survive your transformation were never real relationships to begin with. They were mask contracts, agreements between personas. The relationships that do survive are the only ones worth keeping. They're the ones based not on who you pretend to be, but on who you are becoming. And you'll discover something surprising. When you emerge authentic, you attract authentic people. Not because you did anything special, but because you're finally emitting a clear signal. You're no longer confusing the world about who you are. Huberman talks about this in terms of neural coherence. When your inside matches your outside, your nervous system operates more efficiently. You spend less energy maintaining dissonance, and that energy saving translates into more presence, more magnetism, more capacity for genuine connection. The ultimate paradox is this: you need to disappear in order to really appear. You need to step away in order to connect. You need to be alone to discover that you were never truly alone. Because when you descend into the depths of the unconscious, you find something that Jung called the collective unconscious. You discover that beneath your individual psyche, there's a layer shared with all of humanity. Archetypes and universal patterns, the same story being lived in different ways by billions of people. And in that discovery, loneliness transforms. You realize you were never isolated. You were just disconnected from humanity, from the cosmos, from yourself. The disappearance reconnects you, not with the superficial people you left behind, but with something much larger. Before I continue, I need to stop a moment to speak directly to you. If you've made it this far, it's probably not by accident. You're probably feeling this impulse to disappear, or you've already disappeared, and you're trying to understand what's happening. Or you know someone who has vanished, and you want to understand why. This knowledge that I'm sharing is not easy to find. Jung wrote in a dense, symbolic German over 100 years ago. Huberman speaks in technical terms that require translation. Connecting the two requires work that few channels do. If this content is helping you understand something about yourself, about your journey, about your process, consider clicking the super thanks down below. It's not just financial support. It's you saying that this bridge between deep psychology and neuroscience needs to continue being built. When you click that golden heart, you're funding more research, more synthesis, more revelations like this. You're participating in something bigger than a video. Now, let me tell you what happens after the return. When you re-emerge from a genuine disappearance, you bring something with you. Jung called it the treasure of the unconscious. Insights, wisdom, clarity. That didn't exist before. And you have a choice about what to do with that treasure. Some people keep it to themselves. They use the wisdom they've gained to navigate their own life more effectively. That's valid. It's a legitimate outcome of the process. But Jung chose differently. He returned to share, to teach, to offer the world what he had discovered in the depths. And in doing so, he multiplied the impact of his disappearance exponentially. You will also have that choice. And whatever your decision, it will be correct, because there's no wrong path for someone who has gone through individuation. There's only your path. Now, I need to give you something practical, a protocol for initiating the strategic disappearance safely. First, assess the cost. What are the real consequences of you drastically reducing your social presence for 3 to 6 months? Will you lose your job? Will you destroy essential relationships? Will you create irreversible financial problems? Be honest. Most people overestimate the cost and underestimate the benefit. Second, choose your minimum duration. Jung needed 6 years. You probably need less. But less than 3 months is rarely enough for deep work. Something between 3 and 12 months seems to be the sweet spot for most people. Third, inform the essential people. Don't disappear in a way that causes trauma to others. Tell your family, tell your closest friends that you're entering a period of retreat. You don't need to explain all the details. Just communicate that you'll be less available and that it's not personal. Fourth, create your structure. Okay, let's nail down some routines. Set firm wake-up and bedtime schedules. Establish consistent daily practices. Meditation, journaling, exercise, reading, creative work. Fill your time with activities that nurture your inner work, that feed your soul. Fifth, establish your social minimums. A weekly call with someone who really matters to you. A monthly get-together with a genuine friend. Just enough social contact to keep you from losing your social skills, but not so much that you slip back into that public persona, the mask. Sixth, brace yourself for discomfort. This will be hard. There will be days when you want to quit, when the loneliness feels unbearable, when those internal voices scream too loudly. This is normal. This is part of the process. Persist. Push through it. Seventh, document everything. Write every day. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to make sense, and just record what's happening inside of you, what you're feeling, what you're learning. You'll thank yourself later. This is your story, and you're the only one who can tell it. Eighth, have a reality anchor, someone you can contact if things get too intense, if you feel like you're losing touch. Not to rescue you from the process, but to help you process your feelings if needed. A therapist, a wise friend, someone who understands what you're doing and why you're doing it. Ninth, define your return ritual. How will you re-emerge? What will you do on your first day back in the world? Having a plan makes the transition smoother. It gives you something to look forward to, a light at the end of the tunnel. 10th, trust the process. Carl Jung wrote, "I must not fear the soul. The soul gives us everything. Your unconscious is not your enemy. It's your ally. It's trying to complete you. Trust it. Let it guide you. If you follow these 10 steps, you will emerge on the other side a different person. Not better or worse. Different. More you. Less persona. More self. Closer to your true, authentic core. And when you look back, you'll understand why you felt that impulse to disappear. It wasn't depression. It wasn't avoidance. It was your soul calling you home. Comment below with one word: disappear. If you're feeling this calling, if you know you need a period of strategic isolation to find yourself, if this video reached you at the exact moment you needed to hear this, write disappear and tell me what stage you're in. Still considering it? Have you already started? Have you already returned? I read all the comments, and I'll respond to the most insightful ones. This is a community of souls in process, and you're part of it now. Remember what Carl Jung said: loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. Maybe it's time for you to stop trying to communicate with a world that isn't listening, and start listening to yourself. Your disappearance is waiting. The only question is, will you answer the call? It's time to step into your own journey to wholeness.